Hello and welcome to the audio commentary for Sweeney, the 1977 movie spin-off of the 70s British cop drama, The Sweeney. You should note that Big Ben in the background, that very opening shot, which has become important later, mostly for thematic reasons. Anyway, my name is Simon Abrams. I'll be guiding you through this hard-boiled conspiracy thriller. I'm a film critic, author, programmer, and lover. Cinephile. Anyway, technically, you might have noticed I said you might have note of the fact that this is the first theatrically released spin-off. There were technically 4 Sweeney movies. Only 3 of them were theatrically released. The first of them was a teleplay from 1974 called Regan. It introduced viewers to Jack Regan, the Dirty Harry style cop, played by Mr. John Thaw, made famous by Inspector Morse for a lot of viewers, but also star of such shows as Red Cap and A Year in Provence, the adaptation of Peter Mail's memoir. If you're not already familiar with the Sweeney, its title comes from the real-life Cockney rhyming slang nickname for the Flying Squad, which was Sweeney Todd. In real life, the Flying Squad was a branch of London's Metropolitan Police who had a reputation for having very close ties with London's criminal underworld. The movie you're watching was discussed pretty early on in the show's inception, but it was shot soon after the show's second of 4 seasons, I should add. So it was discussed as early as 1975, and it hit theaters in London in 1977, just after the 3rd season aired. The synchronicity of the 3rd season and this release was a big part of the movie's success, and it went on to gross apparently something like 1,000% of its production budget. Now, before we get some background about the show, I want to point out that this movie was helmed by David Wicks, who directed a number of strong Sweeney episodes, including Season 1's Night Out. For this movie, and as usual, Wicks tried to be very meticulous about mapping out and planning tracking shots, camera movements, angles, etc. So there was no room for miscommunication. This method apparently backfired for the conference room scene that you're seeing here. Wicks had the sequence all planned out, but his plans simply weren't feasible given the camera risers and the movements he had planned for the scene. And he only realized that the scene would be tricky to shoot on the day of when his DP gently tried to break the news to him. Wicks was really embarrassed about that once it dawned on him that his plans were so off, and they had to reset the camera's rostrum and relay the track for the tracking shot, which caused a fair bit of delay, which just shows to you that our understanding of what cinematic and TV direction is just very short-sighted. Often just boils down to how complicated you can make a shot on the budget and the time given to you. In this introductory scene, cross-cutting between a political meeting with Charlie here and Janice Wyatt, a social secretary who is currently being murdered. Her death is much more explicit in terms of violence and soon nudity than was possible for the TV series creators. But that was part of the goal for the movie. Producer Ted Child solicited story ideas from the show's writers with the goal of telling a story that was essentially big enough in scale to justify the expansion from a 48-minute episode to a 90-minute movie. Another goal was to have more violence and sex than the TV format would allow. So this opening scene is really just kind of a jarring kind of shot across the bow, so to speak. And some fans were pretty off-put by these changes, not just in terms of the increase in sensationalism, but the expansion and scope of Regan's investigation here. Normally, Jack Regan and George Carter chase down local bank robbers and their accomplices, but in the movie, Regan's onto a global conspiracy involving rising oil prices orchestrated by unspecified members of OPEC. But really, the main villain of this story is big-time publicist, press agent Elliot McQueen, played by Barry Foster, who works for Charlie here, Charles Baker, played by Ian Bannon. Now, Elliot McQueen is a little more prominent in the kinds of suspects that Regan is used to collaring, since this movie really was immediately very different than the show that came before it. And that, again, really didn't sit well with some viewers. Apparently, some fans speculate that this movie was much more of a hit than the second one because fans were so put off by how different the first movie was. But I think there were other reasons for that as well. Now, you might understandably think that Jack Regan was influenced by Harry Callahan, the Dirty Harry, the first Dirty Harry movie, since both Harry Callahan and Jack Regan flaunt authority, and they both have superior officers who think they're loose cannons, and they act like prima donnas, that sort of thing. But Regan, in the 1974 teleplay that introduced us to him, were more directly influenced by the kind of gritty anti-hero mystique of Popeye Doyle from The French Connection and Jack Carter from Get Carter. The Get Carter connection is especially strong, partly because the Sweeney producer Ted Childs was friendly with director Mike Hodges early on in their respective careers. Hodges also worked with Sweeney writer Trevor Preston on a children's show called The Tyrant King back in 1967. It was apparently rather successful and led to Hodges being offered other teleplay work. Another source of inspiration for that original Regan teleplay was Robbery, the 1967 heist picture directed by Alan Yates. So it's very tempting to connect Regan to both Get Carter and Robbery, since they shared also a co-writer, George Markstein, one of Robbery's 4 credited writers. Markstein contributed to an early draft of Regan, which at the time was called McLean, not Regan. Sweeney, there we go. Now we're getting a scene that gives us an idea of the kind of traditional buddy cop partnership that would come to typify Jack Regan and George Carter's working and social relationship. It wasn't always like this, mind you. At the start of the series, both in the original Regan teleplay and throughout the first season, Dennis Waterman's character, George Carter, is not even a constant sidekick for Jack Regan. Regan's much more center stage in the first season. He's always taking point and solving crimes on his own for one reason or another, usually because other people slow him down. But in season 2, Waterman's character becomes much more of a partner and confidant for Regan. That would become the general style for the show, so it makes sense that the dynamic is reflected here in the movie. I like this opening scene because it shows you the kind of cheeky and, by today's standards, quaint bachelor humor that typified Regan and Carter's relationship. Regan, by the way, is married throughout season 1 and part of season 2. His wife is killed in an episode called Hit and Run in season 2. But here they commiserate about women, hangovers, being late for work, just 2 wild and crazy guys. Regan is played by the great John Thaw, and Dennis Waterman here went on to star in the terrific 80s series Minder, where he plays a bodyguard to George Cole's seedy conman. Of the 3 principal actors from the Sweeney, the one who is conspicuously missing is Garfield Morgan, who played Chief Inspector Haskins. Haskins is always one of my favorite aspects of the show, but he's not in the movie, depending on who you ask, because of a scheduling conflict or because of money or just general creative differences. Now, the origins of Jack Regan are worth delving into a little more, as he wakes up. Ian Kennedy Martin also based the character of Regan on real-life flying squad cop Dave Wilson, who would help to advise the show's writers in the years to come. Another advisor was Jack Quarry, who was a more official liaison between the show's writers and the Metropolitan Police. But Quarry didn't enter the picture until they began production on the show, The Sweeney. Still, Quarry's involvement really shows you that the makers of the series were necessarily concerned with being cooperative with the Metropolitan Police and therefore not rocking the boat too hard. So it's not just a sign of fidelity that the show was, quote, exactly how the Flying Squad would like to see themselves, in the words of producer Ted Childs. Sort of complimentary or contrasting quote, really, that should go along with that is from Ian Kennedy Martin, quoted from Pat Gilbert's terrific book on the making of the Sweeney, which is called Shut It. In that book, Kennedy Martin uses, what you have to ask yourself is, how did a bunch of left-wing television writers end up creating a right-wing hero whose methods bordered on fascist? It's a fittingly provocative question, and one that perhaps more fitting of violent successors like The Professionals, which was another Houston Studios production, as well as Target, a very short-lived BBC attempt to capitalize on the Sweeney's fame that did not really go as well. The Sweeney was the source of some controversy at the time for its violence and swearing. Mary Whitehouse, in her Clean Up TV campaign, was a vocal critic of the show since its debut in 1975. Whitehouse would continue arguing against it for the next 4 years. So again, you would have at least partly, you have to look at this show as a product of its time. It's very dated by today's standards, especially after Life on Mars did a rather good pastiche of it and rather good homage to it. But this was, at the time, boundary pushing for a mainstream show. Also of note, speaking of this officer's uniform, many of the show's creators had some kind of army or military experience. Since, again, it's striking because, again, Ian Kennedy Martin points out this was a show that enforced a fairly right-wing stance. It kind of flew in the face of Dixon of Doc Green style reassuring cop dramas in favor of sensationalism and realism and grit. And The Sweeney is not, in that sense, today a quantum leap forward for the cop drama, or it may not seem that way, but it was, at the time, a bold step for the cop show and the British drama in general for mainstream audiences. It was very popular as a result. It's the difference basically propelled it to that kind of fame. You can't really reproduce that kind of popularity as a result, and BBC didn't when they tried with their show Target, and even Houston couldn't with their show The Professionals, which was much more violent, and just people didn't really want that. Now, the briefing you're about to see in this scene and the way that Jack delegates work is also fairly unusual. For starters, the real Flying Squad typically operated at night and not the daytime, though the TV series also predominantly set in the daytime because they just couldn't shoot at night. What wasn't typically done, other than having your underpants down like here, is portraying Jack Regan as kind of a team player. He's usually working on his own and avoiding contact with any other departments because they usually try to pull rank on him or just don't have the time to deal with him, and that puts him off. Regan may be an anti-hero, but he is also kind of a man of action as opposed to most other people we meet in the show and their version of the Metropolitan Police, many of whom are just sort of married to rules and regulations that Regan doesn't believe in or are effective. So it's striking to see him syncing his guys up and leading them, just one of the boys, basically, as the song goes.
Wages, a lot of wages. I'm not wearing them. Regan, it's Ronnie. You're late. How'd you get on last night? I had a bit of trouble getting in this morning.
Ronnie, his snout or informant, on the phone with him, getting their marching orders here.
Good luck.
Ronnie's played by Joe Malia, by the way. Now for the inquest that Ronnie is going to, which is what we're about to see juxtaposed with the raid. Ronnie is attending an inquest for Janice's death. This courtroom scene also further emphasizes the notion that Regan is all about action. The woman behind him is Bianca, played by Diane Keane. As I said, Regan is all about action. Everybody else talks, circles around each other. He's a doer. That's how the show's writers always kind of portray him. Note the way that Ronnie kind of fidgets and later dismisses the goings-on. His eyes kind of restless and just not eager to hear what these guys have to say, because, again, all talk. I can't help but feel like Ronnie gives voice to authorial comments when he says stuff like bollocks and, dismisses things outright here. Look at the way he's uncomfortable. And the dialogue that's coming up, in general, Jack Regan's lines, they would really just show to go you that there was a bit of formula at play here. He's going to have a variation on what would become kind of like a catchphrase for the series from the teleplay where he says, "Put your trousers on, you're nicked." And that was from 2 years prior. And this action scene really, the scope of it, the fact that you're able to see multiple actors, not just in the foreground, but in the background of the shot, just emphasizes the fact that this movie, unlike the show, was shot in 35 millimeter, so wider angle lenses than the usual 16 millimeters, which were lighter weight, easier to get around, and was really one of the reasons why Houston Studios was able to innovate so much with the Sweeney TV series, because 16 millimeter cameras could be transported into more places, whereas here with the 35 millimeter camera, they kind of had to do more setups and just generally had more master shots, even in an action scene like this. The close-ups, though, are very familiar, and the general format of that fight scene is very much like the series. Oh yeah, here we go. That's bollocks. That's all bollocks. I feel like that's an authorial comment from screenwriter Ronald Graham, but we'll get to that in a moment. This bit here, talking about a cigarette between George Carter and Jack Regan, it's almost a bit like out of a Laurel and Hardy bit. It was apparently improvised between the two actors, a bit of ad-libbing. And as usual, John Thaw is just a champ of dramatic underplaying when it comes to delivering rejoinders and one-liners. Also of note, this episode, the scene ends with Jack Regan grumbling "bastard," which is not the way that he kind of mutters that line. Now, one of the things I admire about the script for this movie by Ronald Graham again is that it's built on a series of juxtapositions. Everything is weighted to contrast Regan's behavior with the behavior of crooks like Elliot McQueen, or with well-meaning but inefficient journalist Frank Chadwick, who we'll meet later. He's played by the tremendous British character actor Colin Welland. You'll know him when you see him, but I'll point him out. These juxtapositions establish the hierarchy of efficiency, and therefore worthiness of the show's characters. Regan is very efficient, down to earth, so he's our guy. Like the real-life Flying Squad members, these guys have booze in their bottom desk drawer. Their sympathetic qualities stem from their mix of working-class responsibilities and sense of humor. At the same time, the job never really ends, which is what makes Regan such an underdog in the show's eyes. He works and works, never recognized for it. Not a coincidence, by the way. Early on, it was decided that Regan would never be promoted beyond detective inspector. That kind of medium to low status was always part of his charm. So again, the call from Ronnie establishes that the job never ends. Generally speaking, covert rendezvous, again, the camera having much more depth of field than is usual with a 16 millimeter camera work. And you're gonna, in a moment, the camera's gonna move laterally to further emphasize that greater scope and expansion. So this was fairly ambitious for this series in terms of direction. But Regan, in general, has no use for the media, who are frequently portrayed as kind of dupes or schemers or know-nothings. So really, he's only able to relate to guys like Ronnie, who's also, feet on the ground, firsthand information. Everything he knows is based on what he has, his experience, basically. Now that nice lateral pan and tracking shot. Here we go. Regan, on the other hand, as opposed to a lot of the people who don't have experience, is always proven to be right about his convictions because he has, like Ronnie, that firsthand know-how, that knowledge. And he's often motivated by not only a sense of civic responsibility, but kind of really visceral disgust for criminals and the naive accomplices that they rope into their schemes. He doesn't really have much of an attitude towards politicians like Charlie Baker, though, because they're usually too out of touch and too above the pay grade of this guy, of Jack Regan. They're kind of just walking obstructions. Regan can only really relate to Ronnie. And Regan's also generally mistrustful of women, as they're often portrayed as being kind of shrill, oversexed, distracting. None of them can really take care of themselves either. And all of them need a good dressing down because they're in with the wrong crowd. It's, tempting to say that this streak of sexism was casual or just a reflexive thing, but it wasn't. It's a strident, constant part of the show, so it's not really surprising that it also jumps at moviegoers as soon as Janice dies, before and after her breasts are exposed. It's not a choice for her. It just happens to her. So the dated qualities of the show were always there. It's not just like, it was just the different times. It was just a matter of style and preference for the show's writers as well. Now we compared that meeting, again, juxtapositions, compare that meeting, Regan's meeting with Ronnie, to the informal private gathering Elliot McQueen has with a group of his international journalists. The scene is, to me, kind of funny just because the makers of this movie were trying to court an international market, while Elliot is similarly trying to expand his clientele from a local to a global base. I can't help but wonder if that's a bit of a meta commentary from screenwriter Ranald Graham, who apparently took on the job of scripting the movie with a bit of reluctance. In either case, Bianca Hamilton, who we saw in the inquest, enters the picture and has a private tete-a-tete with McQueen in the middle of this other private meeting, which is kind of shows you a lot about Elliot McQueen in general. He wants to be seen, but he also wants to control his narrative in private. He's very scheming, controlling, never gets his hands dirty. He always networks, delegates, but never throws a punch. And he is, therefore, within Jack Regan's world, very untrustworthy because he always has other people do his work for him. So is Bianca, really, just because she's associated with him. The actress, Diane Keane, by the way, very popular TV star whose credits include The Legend of Robin Hood from 1975, You Must Be the Husband from 1987 and 88, and The Ruth Rendell Mysteries, which was throughout the 1990s. Keane's performance, I think, makes Bianca a little more sympathetic, but she's ultimately just another victim that Regan has to save from herself. We'll get into that in a moment. But for now, I want to backtrack and talk about Regan, the 1974 teleplay. Again, before we do that, look at that. Big Ben and the big shot like that, designed to make the show attractive to international audiences. So it's like postcard London. And now the 1974 teleplay that I keep mentioning, it was part of Armchair Theater, a very popular anthology series. Was not an immediate hit, but Euston Studios really lucked out when they pushed the character into his regular series, The Sweeney. But the original teleplay, Regan, was a result of a rather strained collaboration between writer Ian Kennedy Martin and Euston producers Lloyd Shirley and Ted Childs. Ian Kennedy Martin was the younger brother of Troy Kennedy Martin, who was the creator of a contemporaneous cop show called Z-Cars, which spanned the 60s through the late 70s. Z-Cars and Dixon of Dock Green were two shows that Regan and the Sweeney in general were kind of reactions to. The Sweeney was more like Z-Cars since it was only reassuring to viewers to a very finite point, whereas Dixon of Dock Green was much more holding the viewer's hands. The cops, just to give you some context, the cops in the Sweeney are much more civic-minded than you might expect based on that, but they're also working-class boozers, bribe-givers, law-benders, womanizers. They're not squeaky clean like Dixon of Dock Green. They're not kindly. They are essentially fascists for democracy, which is a quote that I take from comics artist Howard Chaykin, who he used that phrase when discussing his version and his take on the DC Comics World War II flying squad, the Blackhawks. Still, when Ian Kennedy Martin scripted Regan, he felt pretty put upon by producer Ted Childs, who didn't see eye to eye with Kennedy Martin on a couple of issues. Childs was of the mind that the show the movie and the show should have less dialogue, more action, and Ian Kennedy Martin didn't want a word of his teleplay changed. They compromised ultimately, but Ian Kennedy Martin did not go on to creatively supervise or participate in the making of the Sweeney. Instead, he kind of took Ted Childs to the cleaners because Houston Studios required him to sign off on the rights to the character so that they could make the Sweeney. Ian Kennedy Martin even admitted he took advantage of that and asked for the film rights, the book rights, and 50% of merchandising, which I love that. Good on you, Ian, and more power to you, really. Jack and George on their way out.
And this is after his memoirs were published.
That's why they were published.
Here we see Charlie and Elliot McQueen hobnobbing it up, while Frank, who I mentioned earlier, the journalist, local journalist, tries to get an interview with Charlie, but it doesn't quite happen, and that's really the start of tension between McQueen and both his client, but also Frank here, who mounts his own investigation parallel to Regan's own. Speaking of tension, or at least differences of opinion, Ranald Graham, the screenwriter of this movie, didn't really see the necessity of a character like Regan. Sweeney expert Pat Gilbert chalks up that difference of opinion to a difference in background and points out that Graham was the only one of the show's staff writers to be young enough to indulge in countercultural excesses. Gilbert calls Graham a former dope-smoking student, I should say, not assistant. Would you need help with smoking dope? But before we get to Graham's opinion, it's worth establishing what he was reacting against. Ian Kennedy Martin, the creator of Regan, is described as follows by Pat Gilbert in his book. Ian Kennedy Martin, unsurprisingly, feels deeply sympathetic to Regan, but tends to see the issue of his morality in terms of how convincing and truthful he was as a fictional representation of a flying squad officer. He was heroic in that he confronted things head-on, which was needed at the time, reasons Ian. There were 4 major gangs ripping around London doing armed robberies. Hard drugs were coming on the streets, so the time was right for some tough policing. So in the circumstances, I thought Regan was right. If you looked at the policemen on TV at the time, like on Softly, Softly Task Force, they were just a PR operation for Scotland Yard. You thought, that's wrong if it's not like that. It's not like that at all. Ronald Graham, on the other hand, says, I don't think society needed him at all. That idea was that he was a dramatic character who'd somehow escaped the Cullen Scotland Yard that got rid of the flying squad members involved in corruption. But I think Regan was the sort of bloke who was sympathetic to the kind of things most people are sympathetic to. He would be good to someone down on their luck, but he wouldn't be sympathetic to, say, toffs. Now, as we get Regan's junkyard rendezvous with Ronnie, he doesn't really like what Regan tells him, namely back off, wait and see, but still, Ronnie respects Regan enough to do it, because Regan's got his feet on the ground with Regan. I think it's also important to note that Ronald Graham would go on to add, despite Reagan's Irish name, he saw him unquestionably as a British chauvinist in an era before the wholesale hijacking of nationalism in the late 70s by racist groups like the National Front and British National Party. Reagan's stance was like, we were okay before the Romans came and started making us bad. All that Boudica stuff, he says. Feminism hasn't really come up either, and Reagan could behave outrageously to women. So again, very much the creators were aware of that, or some of them were. Now we get a meeting between Elliot McQueen and Bianca, which once again serves as a sharp contrast with the Ronnie and Regan meeting. McQueen is basically busy networking when he meets with Bianca. She's doing all the labor for him, but he has to fit her into his busy schedule of hobnobbing and public elbow rubbing. Look at that. They're going to a company called Media Incorporated. That's Elliot's group. McQueen's active disinterest in Bianca, combined with his equally active exploitation of her, is a very Sweeney-like subject, despite the glaring differences otherwise. The show was very much about how a new kind of crime was overtaking the country, as Ian Kennedy Martin's quote suggests. A kind of crime that was not easily handled by the Metropolitan Police's archaic by-the-book mentality. So even if Elliot is a very different kind of criminal, he's also an extension of this kind of modern problem. Maybe just the kind of discontent that the show's writers were trying to get at. A modern viewer might find it very easy to dismiss vigilante and natural justice, quote-unquote, style crime and cop thrillers of the 70s. And while I get why, I think the background of the show's creators really make a difference in terms of determining not only why this movie and show and the shows that inspired it are the way they are, but why they were popular at the time. They're artifacts now, but they're really worth considering, I think. Just listen to the jokes that Elliot McQueen is making here, the kind of blithe, barely disguised contempt he has for people when he schmoozes about why they have so much food at their wedding, or about people who show up to a car wash with a motorcycle. Kind of snobby personality, just another aspect of the show's the writers in general found contemptuous about this kind of higher society. Guys like McQueen succeed and are able to sort of just command Bianca and others without really being interested. They're made a career out of being personal, but they have nothing but contempt for people. That's how these guys make deals, by manipulating others, by being callous. And I think it's funny that one of the first things that turns Frank onto Elliot McQueen is the fact that he keeps the company of women like Janice and Bianca. That venal, hard-hearted mentality of how can he have women like that and not be bent? That's, I think, why you'll see Regan and Bianca having a necessarily softer, more romantic relationship, whereas Frank here is, just disgusted by the very association. You'll later see Regan and Bianca drinking and enjoying each other's company. So while Regan may be a chauvinist, to use Graham's word, but Regan is trying. Frank is not. He's why her and not me, which digs into rather sexist or even misogynistic mentality of the character. I think it's also worthwhile to point out what the film's director, David Wicks, thought about Regan, because it does show that despite differences in temperament and background, there are points of contact between how guys like him, Ian Kennedy Martin, and Ronald Graham felt about Regan. He says, again, this is from Pat Gilbert's book. In the director's mind, there seems to be no doubt that Regan was a hero, and that his attitude towards law and justice, sometimes dispensed on the spot, was a wake-up call for a culture suffering from its early pangs of political correctness. Regan's morality, he argues, was seated in the values of his parents' generation, subsequently distorted or lost in the nation's impulse to forget the traumas of 2 world wars. During the 70s, we were starting to disconnect from reality. That's David Wicks speaking. The balloon was starting to float up into a land of somebody's ideological expectations. TV in the 60s was waiting for the 70s realist revolution. The disconnection from reality was a function of 2 world wars with a huge loss of life and a great depression in between. So after all this, you have a reassuring voice like Dixon of Dock Green saying, "Evening all." It was what everybody wanted. When the next generation came up, mine, we felt a bit more secure. The war's over. Okay, we have the Korean War and Vietnam, but at the moment we started to disconnect. But I grew up with the real stuff.
I know it's silly, but
I grew up he goes on to say, I grew up in a world where people shared things. My dad had more money than most because he was a musical artist. But if people were losing out, he'd say, "Come pick some apples in our garden." It wasn't a world where you were worried about children having knives and learning political correctness at school. Again, not the fixation with political correctness. The Sweeney was reconnecting with reality again, said David Wicks. Reagan and Carter were the antidote to years of denial about life's harsh realities. They came in and had to go. It's, again, a very revealing quote from Mr. David Wicks, the director. Now we get a rather noisy and violent scene, one that caused a bit of a stir and was the reason why the film would get an X certificate in England. Johnson and Johnson, a pair of thugs here dressed as cops, who are paid to dispatch Ronnie, show up, and they do so with rather imposing submachine guns shown here in a little plastic baggie.
The chief of Blythe Road.
I thought he was away sick.
The scene was rather bloody and extreme, even especially by the show standards. It seems fitting, the scene that is, as an opportunity as any, to quote Horace Newcomb from the Encyclopedia of Television about the Sweeney. The dark, if not confused, moral world the series represented was difficult to fault on purely realist grounds, as at the time of transmission, a prominent officer in the squad was under investigation and was eventually imprisoned for corruption. Considered in wider cultural terms, the program has been viewed as part of the general ideological shift to the right that occurred in the 70s in Britain as the post-war social democratic consensus broke down. James Donald notably has argued that the Sweeney was fueled by popular anxieties and order stimulated by the press campaign on mugging, and that episodes provided a mapping fantasy for the acting out of unconscious authoritarian urges.
Hi, Sarah.
After this close-up,
You should be looking for me later on. I'll
thanks.
be with the Bennett
Now Elliot gives Bianca her next job, working on the Libya connection.
tonight.
Here we get a pretty explicit idea of the show's creator's low opinion of McQueen. He's more of a pimp than a press agent, and they even refer to him as such later, or Ranald Graham does through Jack Regan. And because the show's writers, and Ranald Graham specifically, didn't really care to develop Bianca as a character beyond a point, she kind of has no choice in the matter, really. She just has to cooperate, and she does. Next, we get the discovery of Ronnie's body, which has parallels to the discovery of Janice's body earlier in the film. Only now Regan's on red alert because this is the second body, and also because he knew Ronnie as opposed to Janice. Ronnie was Regan's guy, so there's extra venom in Regan's already venomous snap. Lines like, supercilious old sod, which is a sort of sing-song quality, but is still pretty keyed up. Special Branch tries to stonewall Regan's inquiries, and they tellingly do it by asking him if he's gone through all the different hoops associated with customs and regulations. And in the world of the Sweeney, formalities are really just tools, and that means they get in Jack Regan's way more often than not. Regan's often shown to be aware of how the justice system works, by the way, but only when he's trying to lecture his boss, Haskins, on what would really happen if they did things his way, by the book, Or Regan uses threats of bureaucratic red tape and purgatorial imprisonment to threaten or lean on accomplices in the show. Stuff like, guys like getaway drivers, weak-willed friends and accomplices, romantic interests, that kind of thing. So it's a laugh that this guy is throwing a line about cooperation in Regan's face. All Regan really cares about is who will help him get the job done. It's one squad under Regan. He's a middleman, but he's still pretty righteous, and therefore the perfect underdog in the context of this series. He can be talked down to, but Regan can also push back with a very accusing finger or two, which is important in scenes like this where he's getting pushed around, and you're gonna see him push back right here, because there's a guy. This guy, he is coming to Regan and asking with his hands out at the wrong moment.
I shall have to report
Here we go.
Sir? Sir? Now listen, little
Yeah.
spy master. You may be...
The long accusing finger of Jack Regan.
I'm a DI and you're a sergeant, right? For your information, if you want to talk to a senior officer, you go through your gun.
John thought so good.
Now shut up.
No children allowed on premises. I just noticed that.
Oh, I know, it's appalling.
Now we get two different kinds of debriefings over drinks. Elliot McQueen with his bell-bottom style pants, and Bianca, really flares. They're not really bell-bottoms. Jack Regan and George are going to be spouting over drinks at a noisy pub, by contrast. But by this point, again, look at how spacious this office is. It does serve as a contrast with the relatively filled and noisy pub here, which is, there's no inch of this that's not covered with a coat or people or desks or booze or cigarettes or faces. It's full. It's lived in. Now, Jack and George, they're already kind of pissed and drunk, so these guys don't normally bond over drinks in the show, by the way, not this excessively. It makes sense, given the implicit association of these two characters with a publican hoi polloi. These indifferent, uneasy faces will become important, so we'll just take note of the fact that they're relatively happy now in background, and toasting each other, unaware of what's happening to Jack and George. Here's Jack Regan loosening up beyond his usual self-righteous mode. He's one of the lads. Pretty telling that the human element is in a pub, though, even if Regan, in an early episode of the show, makes a hilariously nasty comment to a pub owner that he hates bartenders, because bartenders often turn a blind eye to criminal activity which takes place under their nose, which just shows to Goya the show's implicit point, that there was a thin line between the Sweeney's law and actual criminals, that line is very negligible. How do you know the difference between a cop and a crook? You know it when you see it, basically. And Jack Regan, even a pissed Jack Regan, both in terms of anger and in drunkenness, knows the difference. He takes the wind out of... George Carter just takes the wind out of Jack's sails, though, by accusing him of being kind of vainglorious here. And the show's writers, in that sense, kind of stomp and put out the fire of Jack Regan's anger here 2 times, both with George and with his attempt to get it on with the barmaid here. different than the series in that sense, where usually Thaw is able to stomp off with a good rejoinder that ends scenes. And now we're gearing up for another scene that would also probably not be in the Sweeney's TV series, partly because it required a car driving stunt, but also because it showed Regan as being, or a complicated car driving stunt. There were stunts with cars, but this scene also shows Regan as being kind of really vulnerable. Jack drives off and is abducted and forced into an accident by these guys, Johnson & Johnson, who they've been following him from the junkyard. It should be noted that one of the formal innovations of the show, was that it not only used 16mm cameras, but they used regularly rotating freelance crews to film episodes, sometimes not even working with the same crews on multiple episodes. That model was Houston Studios' specialty and a bit of a bother for unionized crews. Still was very, very cost-effective and became a business model not only for Houston, but other British production studios. So for better and worse, these guys really set the bar. Ironically, I think I read producer Ted Child say that it was really always hard to shoot complex dialogue scenes because they required multiple camera setups, which is why the show's MO was to always be fairly, quick, curt dialogue exchange, staccato bursts, really, so that way they didn't need to keep changing the camera setups. So if you just rewatch that series, take a look at how the cameras don't really change when they cross-cut between cameras talking. That's a style choice and a cost-effective one. So I believe camera stunts in general, though, in that sense, not necessarily more expensive than dialogue scenes. The only problem was car stunts in camera and action scenes required used cars to bang up, and they often used Jaguars to that effect. Dialogue was always a source of contention with the show's creators, especially between Ian Kennedy Martin and Ted Childs. This scene, though, of Jack Regan being tortured reminds me of the opening scene of Regan, the teleplay, speaking of Ian Kennedy Martin. That teleplay opens with with another police officer getting a very one-sided beatdown and basically being murdered. It's the same kind of brutal one-sided conflict, very light on dialogue, kind of feeds into this image of Jack Regan as a proto-Stallone working-class martyr. And here we're going to get a little more explicit blood here. Here we go. It's very pronounced. I wonder what kind of fake blood that is, by the way. Now we get to Regan's suspension. He's always being threatened with suspension in one way or another in the series, but he never gets there. Here it happens because the stakes are so much bigger, and because his claims of a conspiracy are that much harder to stomach. Who would believe him without a Haskins-like intermediary speaking on his behalf? I think the omissions of Haskins really open the movie up to a greater sense of free fall for for Regan. Because as incompetent, or at least as ineffective as Haskins was in the show, he was always on Regan's side. Regan's pretty on his own in the movie, however. We get Flying Squad Commander Manon, played by Morris Perry here. He of the wonderful mustache and crooked teeth. Morris Perry was a fairly regular presence on British TV shows, including a couple episodes of Z-Cars, and also a multi-part Doctor Who story from 1971 called Colony in Space. That's part of the John Pertwee era of Doctor Who.
How's he this morning? Depends when he had his first drink.
Ah, gentlemen. Nigel, can you file this? The PM's already made sure that this question will never be asked.
Right.
I was saying to Nigel, there's a big readership in the Canadian West with this.
Now, in this scene, it becomes apparent that Frank won't get his interview with Charles or Charlie, not before the OPEC vote to lower or raise prices. Elliot McQueen's real bosses at OPEC, who I should add we never really see, want Charlie to lower the prices so they can stall long enough to earn a few more billion. But still, by this point, even Charlie can't figure out who Elliot is really working for. He even says as much. But I think one of my favorite bits of dialogue, one that actor Barry Foster, despite the dodgy accent, really nails, is a very casual reply of, "I work for you, Charles." It's such a perfectly kind of oily reply, one that adds to the sense of discomfort surrounding the character of Charlie, and the idea that even he, a high-powered politician, doesn't know what's happening. Elliot McQueen is menacing because he's an unknown quantity. We don't know who he's working for. We'll never meet them, and we'll never be allowed to see what their agenda is. In that sense, I think this movie's script really holds up in ways that some of the more grounded episodes of the show did not, because the concern of a global conspiracy is kind of universal and one that continues to hang over the global political stage, as obnoxious as that sound, both on the right and to a lesser extent the left. The fact that Elliot McQueen is the face of that otherwise vague threat makes for really great hard-boiled storytelling, because it's two middlemen facing off against each other, even if Regan doesn't have the resources or protection that McQueen does. Regan's totally transparent, but McQueen could be doing what he does for any number of reasons, probably for profit, but, it could be because of hidden ideology, hidden agenda. Regan always resents being held accountable, but this is a whole other level of lack of accountability. Regan knows he's doing the right thing, and we know he's doing the right thing, but who knows what Elliot McQueen's clients want from him.
For you, Charles.
And second publican rendezvous for Regan and Carter, the latter of whom turns down Regan's request for help with a line as huffy as, "You're a marked man!" That line kind of makes sense, though, as melodramatic as it seems, because, ultimately Carter is a working-class stiff, too. So he not only needs his job, but we just have to face the fact that he's only so influential. He's a little guy. And, on the other hand, this scene is inarguably the height of paranoia for Regan, who is so destabilized by the fact that even Carter doesn't trust him, that he starts to suspect everybody. Which is striking, because he doesn't suspect Carter. That's by design. One of the constants is that Carter cannot be a bad guy, which is why I think he warns Regan that Special Branch is onto him. So Carter starts to wonder who in the pub is out to get him, basically. Carter delivering his warning. It could be anybody. How every publican's face needs scrutinizing. I like this bit of expressive filmmaking. It reminds me, it's like something out of a Dr. Mabuse film by Fritz Lang. It's really intense. I love it. So Regan really has to get out of there. Everybody knows your name. That's the creepiest thing. That's one of the things I never understood about the Cheers line. Everybody knows my name. Anyway, now Elliot McQueen gets a report on Regan, which puts a fairly explicit connection between Elliot and the Special Branch guys who are following Regan. So Regan's suspicions are instantly proven. There's corruption in the force, and it's not him. The fact that he's blameless needs to be established up front, because in the show's eyes, there were only a few bad apples in the cart, so to speak. There was even an episode from season 3 called Bad Apple. So it's funny to think that Ian Kennedy Martin didn't want the show to be completely complimentary or an advertisement for the Flying Squad or the Metropolitan Police. It necessarily had to be to some extent, since they required the cooperation of the police, not only for shooting permits, but also approval of the stories. As I mentioned earlier, there was an official representative from the Flying Squad named Jack Quarry offering notes. He was apparently not a very tyrannical figure, but nor was he, explicitly obstructive. But yeah, his presence kind of sent a loud enough message. And the fact that there's so much behind the scenes wheeling dealing while Jack, man of action, gets pursued just shows to Goya how investigations like this kind of get stalled. There's just only so many people doing the work. Jack Regan, the guy who's doing it in this case, is just, people are sticking their feet out, slowing them down. Back to Media Incorporated. And now one leg that's thrown out in the way of Jack Regan is the secretary for Elliot McQueen, who really, forces him to slow down and to the point where he's almost chastened, even though he's really running for his life here. And he's on tiptoes, basically, which is kind of different and striking than the show, where Jack's always like a very fiery figure. Dunchester Club. Great setting for this scene between Jack and Elliot McQueen. Good to see Murph and the Magic Tones getting work. That's right.
Mr. McQueen. Yeah. Oh, Inspector Regan, Mr. McQueen. Regan. Do sit down, Inspector.
I don't think the producers were really satisfied with Barry Foster's accent. I think they thought that it was, the American accent was a bit much. And I guess I was never distracted by it because, well, I'll let you be the judge.
This is an undercover operation.
I want to interject one more take on where the character of Jack Regan comes from. This one is from Trevor Preston, another series writer. Preston also scripted I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, the 2003 gangster drama, also directed by Mike Hodges, and Slayground, a Donald Westlake adaptation that starred Peter Coyote, which is from 1983. I believe Kino actually just announced a Blu-ray of that, so keep an eye out for it. I know I will. As for the Sweeney, Trevor Preston wrote notable episodes like Bait, Poppy, Big Brother, Chalk and Cheese. He says this about Regan. Trevor Preston, according to Pat Gilbert, loathed the police, based his version of Regan on the tough coppers he encountered as kids. Though he concedes today that the more I got to learn about them during the Sweeney, the more I began to understand what a dreadful job it is. If you're dipped in that cesspit of violence and vice, you had to be tough psychologically and physically. And I think that's important here, while Elliot McQueen wears him down just by sheer dint of influence and the fact that he is seemingly able to have his fingers in everything and is just able to lie to his face and do it so smoothly that ultimately, even as they both know that he's not telling the truth, what can be done? What can be said in the face of all this red tape? What can Jack Regan do to stop such a multifaceted conspiracy? I think that really fueled the difference between this movie and its scenario and the show. And I think that annoyed a lot of TV show fans who were like, well, I just want more of the same. It's like, well, this isn't supposed to be more of the same. I think that difference is a strength, honestly. Albeit one you have to get, you have to acclimate to. You have to get used to it. Now, Frank declares war on Elliot McQueen, which is the explicit start to Frank's investigation, which that alone shows that the movie has a greater ambivalence about the press than was normal for the show. When I think about the show's depiction of the press, it's usually somebody out to get a scoop or advance their career or look smart for the cameras. Members of the press in the show do not normally look good because they're not really interested in interrogating the statements of politicians. They just want scandals, and they just want to break the news, and they just want to look good. Frank is clearly righteously pissed off, almost to a Jack Regan level, The difference between Frank and Jack being that Frank's influence just doesn't extend to a practical, hands-on sphere, so it doesn't get as much play as Jack Regan's own investigation. Still a noteworthy shade of difference between the show. Now Regan hobnobs with his snout, his tail, which is different from a snout. Acknowledging, once again, indirectly, Elliot McQueen's influence, because this guy is only on Regan's tail because Elliot McQueen is so powerful, and because the accusations that Regan makes is seemingly so unbelievable. Now we get back to Johnson & Johnson, who are primarily played by Michael Coles, Chris Dillinger, and Del Baker. I always like these characters because they sort of like a dark answer to characters from the series who are in 2 episodes, these Australian robbers from the Sweeney episode Golden Fleece. In that episode, 2 happy-go-lucky Aussie crooks rob and joke their way through a series of high society robberies and always manage to stay a couple steps ahead of the Sweeney. In fact, they wind up flying away just before Regan and Carter can catch up with them in that episode. Those characters were played by Patrick Mower and George Layton. They were so popular, they brought them back for a season 3 episode. But that second episode hadn't been shot before this movie had been made. So my association is just a freewheeling one. I just think of these 2 types of characters because Johnson & Johnson are really the kinds of crooks that the Sweeney, they're more like the kind that the Sweeney chased in the regular series. This time, however, Regan is trying to make a tougher collar, and he knows inevitably that the way to get his man is, even more extra legally than usual. Oh, look out. If nothing else, this chase scene, or the scene that's starting right now, this action scene, draws even more attention to the difference between Frank and Regan's investigation. The stakes are hugely greater for Regan, getting shot up and immediately from the get-go. He's more of a threat. He's more, he's able to push back, basically. And it also emphasizes the greater centrality and range of shooting locations for the film. Because, this was shot on a relatively large budget for the show. It was roughly, I think, 900,000 pounds, which if we adjust for inflation, would be about $7.2 million American dollars today. Not exactly chump change, so it was a gamble that Houston Studios took, and were only really able to take thanks to the participation and funding of Nate Cohen and EMI Films. But the gamble paid off, and it really led to a second movie spin-off. One that, again, a lot of fans prefer, but, that movie bombed at the box office is all I'll say. So there was never a third theatrical movie with Jack Regan and John Thaw. There was a 2012 reboot with Ray Winstone, but we shan't be talking about that. Really a rather long action scene especially by the show standards, but it's also complicated. Look at how many different moving parts this scene is comprised of. The double-decker bus, the stairway scene, the apartment scene. This was a fairly elaborate sequence. And in this case, I think bigger is better. So, again, you decide for yourself, but I think it really just adds something. It adds value.
We need protection. Get on your radio, quick. I'm flying squad.
No help from this guy. The Bobby on the beat. Oh, geez. I didn't want to spoil that one. Even though, hopefully, if you're listening to this audio commentary, you will have actually already seen the movie already. So hopefully none of these are spoilers for you. Now back to Frank's investigation, which is hitting a wall pretty hard. Frank he can't even get past the secretary. Frank, I think, when he chews Elliot out and he kind of just lays out all his cards on the table, his anger is much more about whether or not he gets an exclusive, though. So when we get the cross-cut back to Regan running for his life, the parallel between the two stories creates a rather unflattering connection. You know, one man is fighting for his life and his cause, the other is fighting for his byline. And, you know, Frank gets what's at stake. It's just that when he threatens to put the screws to Elliot,
Frank, why don't you take a seat? What can I do?
He's got personal reasons, but still, he's defined by that scowl, that, you know, that drive, which is not nothing. So he's a more complicated figure than you'll normally see for a supporting character of this type in the series. Back to David Wicks, by the way, who directed this movie and insisted that the show, like the movie, was very moral. This is also from Pat Gilbert's book, Shut It. The show, according to Wicks, said, "Look, we're not exactly advocating an eye for an eye here, but there are extenuating circumstances. Things are getting tougher on the streets, so I'm buggered if I'm going to arrest you and therefore place you in the relative peace and safety of medical care, provide you with heating and lighting and lawyers. I'm going to give you a smack, and don't do it again." And everybody saw this and said jubilantly yes. When I was a little boy, sure, we did scrumping for apples and pears, but we didn't steal anything of value and we weren't on drugs. The police would clip you around the ear and say, "Don't do that again." That was because there were bigger things going on, rebuilding the economy of Europe.
I'm trying to think.
There had been unbelievable suffering, displaced persons lining the roads, loved ones killed in this area or that, a kid scrumping in Leamington. It just didn't matter. The Sweeney brought back that kind of perspective. So that's the mentality that Wicks has. But Gilbert, I think, is right to point out that Ranald Graham, who scripted this movie officially, did not share that point of view. Wicks had as Gilbert says, has his own view on natural justice, but Ranald Graham actually almost removed his name from the credits of the movie because he didn't necessarily like what became of the film and his ideas. What specifically he didn't like, it's hard to tell, but that another juxtaposition of point of views that is worth noting, I think, as even Frank and Elliot clash.
Sarah.
Yes, Mr. Queen.
Would you get me Johnson & Johnson? Second number.
Now, Regan and Bianca are still running, not very fast, but they both have great stamina. And the net around them is tightening even more with Elliot McQueen and the Johnsons searching for them. I think we get a very unsettling scene now, an important one for the movie, when Regan presses Bianca to talk about her involvement.
Oh, yeah, it came last week. You want to watch it, mate?
You get a speech from her that I think is rather ugly, and you'll soon see why, or if you haven't, hopefully you have already seen why. One where she says, she initially puts up a good front and pushes back against
Those cops are thick as thieves, right?
Regan with lines like, "What are you, a detective or a vicar?"
Sergeant. Those two items have got to be accounted
But
for.
she ultimately kind of breaks down with this rather scandalizing speech where she exclaims that she's no better than a prostitute, which is a peak of the show writer's misogyny and general mistrust of women.
No, leave her.
That
Right, you've got some
exchange between her and Regan's just starting.
witnesses.
You're the goddamn limit. explanations from me. I want some bloody explanations.
The phone's tapped. The whole place could be bugged.
Now, according to the show's logic, there's an honest and quasi-dignifying quality to the speech that's about to happen, because in Regan's eyes, at least Bianca knows what she is, which makes her far lesser evil. Dig this wallpaper, by the way. Bianca's really an anti-hero, which is not the same as a villain, and it's really as close as the show gets to a gray area for women and accomplices like that. Most of the time, the show's writers would just blame women and accomplices for bad life choices, which is really kind of not great. But that's the logic of the show. It's the logic of this type of show. A kind of moralistic judgment, though.
She was his mistress.
It's the kind that Bianca rails against here, but it still finds her out, and it still smacks her down right here. It's hard not to get ahead of myself in that sense in talking about this scene, because it really overshadows a lot. There's a great sense of self-awareness or self-consciousness in a scene like this, I think, even as it is rather gross.
I'm a whore! That's what I am!
Because
I'm the queen! I hunt for his clients!
Graham or whoever collaborated with him on the script, they have to walk back this confession, this scene. It's so harsh. It's so hard to swallow. Now, I've been using some quotes from David Wicks, which don't make him seem very sympathetic, but I should add that he did direct one of the better episodes of the series from season 1 called Night Out. It's the one where Regan and one of his ex-lovers spend much of the evening hanging out and waiting for signs of a bank heist at an adjacent bank. Much more about their interpersonal drama and communication. So it's a rather warm sequence, and one that shows you that Wicks was capable of being quite sensitive. It's just that for this narrative and for this particular project, he has to be a little more, I think it shows a little more of his capability to be a little more hard-hearted. Now, we go back to Frank, just as one of the Johnsons tries to blow up his office. I always like this set piece, which has an almost Hitchcock quality to it. Hitchcock on a budget, really. It's very precisely directed, and maybe, I think, one of the better directed and choreographed sequences in the movie.
Clean your windows, Gav.
What now?
It's the contract. I'll be off in a minute.
All right, get on with it. Bash that out. Be back in 5 minutes.
She need to fetch the steps in here.
I'm not talking just because I'm enjoying this scene so much. It really is one of my favorites in this movie. I notice the way the camera kind of lingers on Colin Whelan's bloody body. They really were going for that X certificate, weren't they? Now, this scene is slightly more sensitive between Bianca and Regan, where they share a drink. It's why I mentioned Night Out, because it warrants... It's a bit like this scene. It has that kind of warm tone to it, even if it does end with them, like in Night Out, Regan having sex, which in this context I find a bit icky, but I I am reminded of Night Out, since they have both a very unsentimental view of romance. You know, one minute you're sharing a drink and a laugh and commiserating, and the next minute it's sexy time. I would argue, however, that this scene proves that the show's writers really wanted to give Diane Keane's character some kind of life beyond just being a fallen woman for Jack Regan to rescue. You know, she makes her own decisions, including deciding to have sex with him after breaking down and talking about how she's only a whore, only a prostitute. You know, it's a trope and a cliched one. You know, the prostitute who makes her own decisions, but it's a slight de-escalation from the misogyny of the previous Bianca scene. They like her, but they don't really think very highly of her. That's what I was saying.
5. Okay.
I just want to take a moment and note that Elliot McQueen works again for Media Incorporated. Hold that sign there. Guess this shows the creators really wanted to avoid accusations of defamation of character, huh? From anybody at all. Anyway, McQueen once again doesn't lay out the stakes for what his real bosses want not until he's called them abroad. There is, however, some crucial information given to readers throughout this bedside news briefing with that Regan is enjoying right before getting laid. And the constant threat of Diane Keane's breast being exposed. Oh, there it goes. And again, it's not an immodest peak either. It's, you know, again, really going for that X certificate. Now, Elliot's phone call, again, which seems to just be in here so viewers don't spend too much time thinking sexy thoughts. And then back to Regan and Bianca in bed in a moment, which provides a rather sedate conclusion to a sex scene. Sort of like a cross between British New Wave and Ypres file intrigue. Ranald Graham, the show screenwriter, told Pat Gilbert that there was a sort of juvenile sex comedy element to the film's depiction of lecherous working-class cops. Gilbert identifies that strain of humor with, or associates it with the popular Carry-On movie comedies of the 60s and 70s. And Graham agreed. There is a core I-would quality to Regan and Carter's catcalling and objectifying of women. He said Ted Childs used to go on about this a lot in script meetings, that Regan and Carter were two seedy bachelors. Policemen like them had no meaningful home lives, and the people they tended to go off with were women like air hostesses who had no home lives either. Their jobs were very similar, a bit of excitement and glamour, but not a great deal of domestic contentment. And oh yeah, George Carter's here. Look at this one guy. This guy, every time I see this bit, and I have been rewatching it lately, this guy in the van looks like Pete Postlewaite, but let me get this out of your head right now. Dennis Waterman is not being stalked by a very young Pete Postlewaite. Stop thinking about that. Anyway, the Carry-On style humor of the film and in the show is relevant not only to the treatment of women, I think, but also the way we get teased with a bit of John Thaw nudity, but it's only for yucks. It's only, you know, don't get confused. You're not gonna see the old man's todger. It's just a joke. Sex, women are sexy, men are just oversexed. Even if really Thaw even if Thaw himself doesn't play it for laughs, which is what makes it funny, almost like a Leslie Nielsen kind of dramatic undercutting.
George!
And Dennis Waterman's great line, "It's all right, he's a policeman." So here we enter, like, oh God, that man is naked.
He's a policeman.
Which I think is revealing in more than just a little throwaway kind of way.
Bloody hell, Governor, this is a bit flaming strong.
Little bed and breakfast sign hanging up there. Now, an impromptu debriefing in the bathroom with, again, that amazing wallpaper. Very rococo. At this point, Regan's conspiracy seems very real. So he doesn't need to convince Carter that he needs to help anymore. I love that he's delivering a debriefing, not only in the bathroom, not only
Sweeney!
basically in the nude with a trench coat covering his body, but, okay, again, Pete Postlethwaite. I mean, not Pete Postlethwaite. Get that through your head. Not Pete Postlethwaite. Don't think about Pete Postlethwaite.
Sleeps with the old minister. She dies.
But now we get Jack Regan basically in the buff, delivering a serious debriefing with that wallpaper.
Everyone's known to McQueen.
Thank you. You've earned yourself a
And
better.
we're going to get to my favorite detail.
She knows.
He's got his hands in his pockets. Yes. That to me is very carry-on-ish. But then we get back to this
You know what I think?
ugly attitude towards Bianca, where she confesses she slept with Elliot McQueen. And once again, the scene says a lot about the series creators' conflicted attitude towards women. You know, if women are frank and brash, basically, then they're as good as one of the boys. But she can get under his skin and regain the upper hand sometimes. But it's a very cold comfort, because look at that. Look at the ferocity of that. And she cries. She's not one of the boys. She's also not just a prostitute, however. In the show's eyes, she's something different. You know, she's something that Regan and the audience surrogate doesn't understand. She's doomed, but she's honest. She's, complex. By today's standards, she's not complex enough, and I would argue probably not by the standards of the day either. Waiting to see if the coast is clear. Look at that shot. Wonderful shot.
Right, now!
And here they go, killing off Diane Keene's character. Kicks off another chase, the difference here being that this one starts with the death of the third character, and a rather prominent one, only one with really, other than Ronnie, even more than Ronnie, more of an emotional attachment to Regan. And the Johnsons give chase, leaving very little time for reflection on Regan and Carter's part. But while they're on the run, they do stop to at least say, I should have come out last. I should have protected her better. Which is the show's attitude towards women in a nutshell. Emotional breakthroughs only come to characters after the object of their concern is dead. Regan now, because of that, though, gets to rub the fact that he was right in his superior's face. And because nobody listened to him, he gets the cold comfort of being able to say, I told you so, which is a pretty familiar conclusion to investigations in the Sweeney. My favorite example of which is this hostage crisis episode in season 2, where Regan gets to tell Haskins off and say something like, if you had taken my advice and let the snipers shoot when they had a shot of the robbers, people wouldn't be dead, I told you so. And that's, to me, very Jack Regan-y. You know, he's always the underdog, and I think
With respect, if
there's a reason for that. You know, one of the inspirations, Dave Wilson, the real life inspirations for this character, according to Ian Kennedy Martin, is really defensive, more so of dogs than people. And Ian Kennedy Martin tells Pat Gilbert that, quote, in the 80s, we were living next door to Stuart Copeland of The Police, the band. And whenever we were trying to get the kids off to sleep, Bananarama would turn up and start singing in the back garden, which I think is a wonderful image. They had these two dogs the size of fucking donkeys, which then started barking. I heard that you could get an echo chamber that barked back at them, and apparently it drives them mad. I was laughing about this, and Dave Wilson said, you'd do that to a poor fucking animal, would you? It's not their fault they're barking. He was deadly serious. It's really hard fucking attitude. So again, really hard fucking attitude, but more so for dogs than live people. Dead women, yes. Live dogs, yes. Not anyone else. Then we have a modestly scaled, but cleanly choreographed and effectively directed lobby scene where Charlie leaves the elevated area before Regan and Carter and their boss, Commander Manon, can be seen. Regan's off in his own world and doesn't notice Charlie, though. Here he comes. He's not operating on the same plane of existence, so that's not surprising. And neither is the viewer, who knows more than either group here, which is fitting.
I'm the PPS. I'd like a word with you if you'll come with me, please.
Unfortunately, for Manon, and therefore also for Regan, the guy they've come to see has not a lot of use or interest in doing anything about these accusations that Regan's about to lay at his feet. Manon realizes that he's completely out of his depth. Dennis Waterman, with his gift for being a good foil, really carries the scene.
Sorry to bring you all this way.
Oh, it's nothing really, just a very small fracture.
You know, the argument that this guy's going to make to Regan is also the kind that Regan would make if this were a regular episode of the Sweeney, and the guy they were talking about is a small-time crook. He says, people like McQueen are above arrest. This is the kind of argument that Regan would make if he were defending like an informant. Like he needs guys like that. He needs small-time fish to catch the bigger ones. Whereas in the show, Haskins would be like, no, we need to arrest him. We need to set an example and just go ahead. And Regan here is
the cooperation of our oil partners.
Bucking that trend because he's in over his head and he just needs something. He needs to be able to do something. He needs to be able to fix what he's seeing, the problems he's seeing, and to avenge the people he's lost. Which is again a very Sweeney attitude in its own way. So, once again, something that's different leads to something familiar, and then vice versa. It's basically different roads to the same conclusion, I think. Same attitudes, which is what makes this movie so interesting as an extension of the show. It is different, but it's not that different, essentially.
First class at the British taxpayers' expense. Bloody marvellous.
Hardly. Between us, the Secret Service is shipping him out freight via Tilbury.
When?
11 o'clock tomorrow, morning tide.
You mean he's not under arrest?
People like McQueen are above arrest, Inspector.
I love this
And if his people thought we were going
setup of the way that the conversation is done. Very simple. But again, this type of scene would be shot much more in close-up in the show. here they're kind of flexing their budget with a master shots here, basically.
Kinetic, chemical,
Dennis Waterman doing his thing
radiant and heat. They're all forms of energy, see?
with a
Amazing what they teach at school, isn't it?
having to catch up with Regan.
I'm reinstated.
Well done, Jack.
Listen, George, I'm
Regan wants natural justice, to use a preferred phrase of director David Wicks. So he won't be told off. He won't be dissuaded. And here, Dennis Waterman, George Carter, delivers a bit of proto-Michael Mann philosophizing about how energy is the capacity to do work, which is... I honestly share the uncomprehending look of this desk sergeant, who I believe is played by Johnny Shannon.
Can I use your phone, please?
And there's Tower Bridge. See London and get blown away. Sorry. Now we begin the final confrontation with Elliot McQueen, which starts out with a stakeout. Once again, the viewer only understands that the stakes of the scene are after they've essentially been made to emotionally feel their way around things. So there's an info dump at the start, but nothing about what's going to happen. Nothing about how the bust is going to happen, nothing about whether it's a bust at all. And that lack of knowledge makes the inherent tension of the cross-cutting between these guys and the Johnsons, who we'll see in a moment, that much more anxiety-inducing. There's three different parties here. There's Regan and George. There is Johnson and Carter.
You don't think McQueen's people are going to try and...
No, sorry, Regan and George, Elliot McQueen, and the Johnsons in their separate car. So it's keeping things... It's a very effective way they introduce things and let you get used to each new element as you watch. It's not a lot of hand-holding. It's very much being thrown into the deep end of Regan's counter scheme and having to feel your way around. That makes this a bit of very effective pulp filmmaking, if not necessarily the most sophisticated kind. Apparently, David Wicks had to fight tooth and nail to get the ending you're about to see into the finished movie. He was ultimately reassured that the film's final line and the ending in general worked when he went to an ABC cinema in London at the evocatively named Shaftesbury Avenue, where he saw that people left the theater arguing and talking among themselves about whether Carter was right to blame Regan for what's about to happen, or if Regan did the right thing. That range of reactions, in other words, for Wicks was a sign of success. And the ending in question is a real jolt of a conclusion, not the least bit because it's more ambiguous than anything you'd see in the series up until this point. Sure, there were episodes in season 2 that hinted at the idea that Regan thought he was above the law, or at least above the letter of the law, like Super Snap, season 2 episode, where Regan tries his best to pay off and protect one of his informants. There's nothing as dark as what's about to happen, though. It's very unsettling, even as it sort of leaves yours with an uneasiness that they can just sort of walk off because they're literally leaving the theater in a moment. But since you're watching this on Blu-ray, you're going to have a necessarily different experience, unlike the people who saw this in theaters. Where do you go? I mean, presumably you can just get a pint outside instead of reaching into your fridge and being like, wow, this is dark. But I think one of the reasons why they didn't try anything this dark was because there is a different audience for movies than for TV. Like, it was just the risk of alienating the ideal TV viewer was just too great.
I'll tell you what it's going to prove, McQueen.
Barry Foster pouring on the smarm and Regan giving him the juice. John Thaw really makes you believe that he's out to get this guy.
Johnson! No!
In that Peckinpah worthy slow motion really just establishes the unsettling implications of this act that Reagan kind of orchestrated. There he is, right in the background, waiting. He did this. He is responsible, as Waterman's character is about to say. And that's why this movie ends on arguably the most unsettling one. The accusing figure of Dennis Waterman and George Carter pointing right at Jack Reagan, and that blown up freeze frame, and then that cruel slow fade to black. Oh my God, I love this ending because it's so unsettling. You can see this movie any number of times, and just the fact that it just leaves you with that yeah, he did it. He's the bad guy in this context, even if he did it for good reasons. A real fascist for democracy, really. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the film. Thanks for watching it with me. Hopefully we will run into each other again at another audio commentary.